Oh my goodness. Just a second. So, hey guys, welcome back to my list of top 10 favorite Shakespeare plays, and we are finally at number 1, the gold medalist, which is of course Hamlet. Yeah, so I think you can probably gather from everything that this is definitely one of my favorite stories. It's not even just my favorite Shakespeare play, although that's high praise in and of itself. It's one of my favorite stories, period. Everything from the poetry in this play to the characters to the plot to like everything. I just absolutely adore it. It's not flawless. Like, for instance, Shakespeare, could you please tell me a little bit more about what happened with the pirates? Just saying, I would love to know that. But that's a minor nitpick. The character of Hamlet himself is just so fascinating. That's really what pulls me into this play. It's very much kind of a slow burn psychological study. In some ways it can almost be thriller-esque depending on which version we're looking at and what part of the play we're looking at. The version that I'm most familiar with is the David Tennant version. This was the first version of Hamlet that I learned. I actually learned Hamlet by watching this on one half of my computer screen and having No Fear Shakespeare open on the other half. If you don't know what No Fear Shakespeare is, it's a SparkNotes series that has the original text on one side. For me it would be here, for you it would be here. And then it has the same thing in a modern translation on the other page next to it. It's really, really nice for learning it. You do lose something in the translation, of course, but for the most part it's really good and bang on. So I learned Hamlet by watching this on one side of my screen and having SparkNotes open on the other side, and then I would pause it and read through and try and figure out what they were saying and then watch them pause and watch them pause. So this is the version that taught me Hamlet originally. And one thing that David Tennant really, really emphasizes in this version, and this is one of the more fascinating aspects of the character I find, is his madness. Because Hamlet is pretending to be mad in this play. But it's questionable whether he's actually mad or not. Because on the one hand, Hamlet is faking insanity to get everyone to kind of play along, or I guess just underestimate him. I think it's a method for him both to protect himself from the people around him, in particular Claudius, but it's also a method where he's able to kind of maneuver everyone into places where he wants them a little bit more easily. It's also just him stalling for time, because Hamlet has a really hard time actually acting on his revenge plot, which I think is understandable because, you know, it involves killing a person, so that's good that he's not quite so eager to just jump into this. Totally Pretentious actually made a comment regarding Hamlet where he referred to him as a lost soul, and I have to agree. And I'll link the video that comment is under as well. It is by Books I'm Not Reading. It's a really good video. One thing we don't get to see in this play that I've always wondered about, I would love to see what Hamlet was like prior to his father's death, because when we meet him, he's deep in the throes of grief. He just lost his father less than 2 months ago. And his mother has remarried his uncle. He's completely alone. He can't talk to anyone about his grief. And if he tries to express it, then people basically act as if he's being ridiculous. There's one speech that Claudius gives near the beginning of the play that is particularly brutal, where it's masked in this very congenial tone, but it's basically shaming Hamlet very, very brutally for grieving for his father. Because, oh, it's been 2 months, everyone else is over it, why aren't you? Because I'm the only not crazy person when it comes to this, apparently. And this keeps happening throughout the play. Like, for some reason, people just don't think about the fact that maybe, you know, the fact that his father just died might be a reason as to why he's acting a little bit differently than he normally would. The only person who really seems to understand that this is a thing that is a reasonable reaction is Horatio. And yeah, all I can say is I'm really glad Horatio exists, because he is Hamlet's real only tie to sanity in this play for most of it. One of the results of this, I think, is that Hamlet, he's faking insanity, but I think as the play goes on, he does start to go legitimately insane. I think it depends on the actor we're talking about. David Tennant's Hamlet definitely does start to lose it a little bit after a while. It probably reaches its peak in the closet scene and then just before, because yeah, yikes. Then he regains some semblance of sanity after this, although he does occasionally surge in and out. For the most part, he stays a lot more stable after that. And then there are other Hamlets, like, it's been a while since I've seen it just because it's not readily available, but Benedict Cumberbatch's Hamlet, if I'm remembering correctly, was a lot more stable throughout the play. He did still suffer a lot. You could see the insanity coming through, but it wasn't nearly as in your face as it is with David Tennant. So it's dependent on the actor, basically. I think whether you regard it as legitimate insanity or not, there's definitely some form of mental illness going on here, because he's in extremely stressful circumstances. The death of a loved one alone is enough to cause some kind of severe mental illness. And add to that the fact that when the play starts and throughout it, he's basically being gaslit in reference to his grief by almost everyone around him. And then on top of that, finding out that your father was murdered by your uncle, who is now also your stepfather, and it's been 2 months. Like, honestly, I would be in shock if he didn't show any signs of mental illness at this point. So, yeah, the result is a very, very intense psychological story. This play doesn't have as many overt battles as, say, something like Henry V, where there is an actual on-stage battle, several. But it has a ton of psychological warfare, not just between Hamlet and Claudius, although that's a definite thing, but between Hamlet and himself. The to be or not to be speech is basically him warring with himself over what he should do. And this happens a lot. That opening speech of his, the "oh, that this too solid flesh would melt" speech, it's basically him just ranting out his grief and trying to describe what's going on. Like, it works well as an exposition piece because the audience finds out a whole bunch of stuff from that we wouldn't have otherwise known. But that sounds like an actual speech that someone would give in this scenario to themselves, just pacing the room and ranting out their feelings, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get some of it out because no one will listen. And he's alone. And on top of that, his mother just asked him to stay in Denmark, which could, depending on how you read it, could go one of two ways, as I see it. There's probably lots of other ways, but these are the two that pop into my head. The first is, I don't want to go because last time I left, one of my family members died, and I didn't get to say goodbye because he was in Wittenberg when his father died. The other option, though, and this is the one that I tend to go with more, because of how he talks about Denmark and how he seems to be feeling towards everyone at this point, is I don't want to stay, but I'm staying because I don't really have a choice. My mother and uncle father asked me in public, and they pulled all kinds of emotional cards that I can't refuse without looking like an absolute jerk. So he can't really do anything about it. He has to stay. So he's being forced to stay in this place where he's suffering intense emotional pain. He's not able to deal with it in any kind of healthy way because of what the situation he's in. And even if he was, I'm not sure Hamlet would actually be very good at doing that without some help. But, and he can't leave. He's stuck here. In this version in particular, throughout that whole first scene, Claudius is talking to other people for a good chunk of the scene, but you can tell that everyone is just kind of awkwardly aware of this guy standing in the corner looking very sullen. The second he's alone, basically, he starts crying. But, so you can tell that he's been suppressing this and fighting it back whenever anyone else is around. It's one of the reasons that I'm so relieved when Horatio turns up. Well, we see Horatio before we see Hamlet, but when Hamlet sees Horatio for the first time in this play, because you can just see the relief on his face, and then he pulls back and gets really suspicious again when Horatio starts talking about seeing his dead father, because fair. Also, Hamlet is very, very suspicious of everyone around him, and deservedly so, given what we see in this play. You can see him kind of going, oh, did you see my father now? Let's see what's going on. But then throughout the rest of the play, Horatio becomes his support, because Horatio is the only one who doesn't lie to him. Everyone else is lying to him and manipulating him and attempting to control him and watching his every move. Which, yeah, just saying, that also can't be helping with the whole mental health thing right now, so yeah. Now, just to be clear, I don't want it to sound like Hamlet is a perfect saint and oh, woe is Hamlet and everyone is horrible and Hamlet is an angel. Absolutely not. I mean, he kills Polonius because he lashes out in anger without thinking. Which, yeah, he commits murder. He regrets it afterwards, but he still commits murder. And then his treatment of Ophelia is really appalling. Yeah, he's more than a little sexist, I would say. You can see the same thing coming out with Gertrude, but it's a little bit more painful with Ophelia, I think, because she's blameless in this, whereas Gertrude's involvement is a lot less black and white. I personally don't think Gertrude knew that her husband was murdered, but that doesn't change the fact that she married her husband's brother less than 2 months after her husband died, and then has been refusing to let her son grieve properly. So yeah. Then there are times when Hamlet can be downright nasty to people around him, but again, it's kind of like, you're being nasty, but so is everyone else. So, still don't condone it, but it's just such a mess. One dynamic that I find really, really interesting in the relationships with Hamlet is the dynamic between him and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern versus the dynamic between him and Horatio. Because based on how Gertrude and Claudius interact with Horatio, I think they probably don't know him. My guess is that Hamlet met him off at university, or he's not around court very much, or he's just really, really quiet. Either way, they don't seem to know him as much, or if they do know him, they don't really understand that he's as close with Hamlet as he is. I personally go with the headcanon that the two of them met at Wittenberg when they were off at university. By contrast, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are known very, very well by Claudius and Gertrude, to the point where they call them in when they need help with Hamlet. So my guess is that they were probably his childhood friends, which makes it all the more heartbreaking when they spy on Hamlet for Claudius and Gertrude. Now, I'm not sure if their hearts were in the right place here. I think that they probably are at least somewhat concerned about Hamlet, but I also think that they are not at all opposed to stabbing him in the back somewhat, when given the fact that they start to spy on him more overtly. And so when it's really somewhere between sad and tragic, but also really interesting to see how Hamlet reacts to these two friends who have, in his eyes, betrayed him versus this friend who has stood by him and is supporting him. And of course, it really, really stands out in the way that these friendships end, because Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, that friendship ends with them dying off stage because Hamlet finds out that they're carrying letters to have him killed, so he rewrites it so that they die instead. His relationship with Horatio, that friendship, it ends with Hamlet dying as Horatio is crying over him, and Hamlet saying, "Live a little bit longer so that you can tell my story." Like, he saves Horatio's life in that final scene, because Horatio almost kills himself because Hamlet is dying in front of him. And that says a lot about how these two friendships are, or three friendships, I guess, since Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are separate people, even if they're always paired together. Another debate that comes up a lot with this play is the nature of the ghost. Is the ghost actually real, or is it a figment of Hamlet's imagination? Now, I tend to mostly think that it probably is a real ghost for a couple of reasons. One, I just want it to be a real ghost, because that says a lot about what happens in this play. Two people other than Hamlet see this ghost. I mean, the opening scene has Horatio and then the guards seeing Hamlet Sr. And Horatio confirms that it is Hamlet Sr. So I guess the bigger question would be, is the ghost his father, or is it something else? And again, I think it depends on what you want to do with it. If you want it to be emphasizing Hamlet's mental illness at this point, then having it be something other than his father, or even ambiguous, you can really do a lot with that, and you can really explore what's going on here with that. However, I do like the idea of it being his father more. And there's another question I have regarding that, though, is the ghost, I believe, is real at the beginning, but how real is he in the closet scene? Because in that scene, Hamlet is explicitly the only character who sees the ghost. Gertrude can't see him. I personally think that in some versions he is real, but I think you can very easily play it that he is not in that scene. That is Hamlet hallucinating this ghost. Because in the play, that scene is the height of his madness. That's when he kills Polonius and then has a very, very intense conversation with his mother that is, oh, so stressful, so much stress. And then this ghost is in here, and Gertrude is freaking out because my son is talking to someone that isn't there. More than that, he's talking to a dead person that isn't there. So, like, you can definitely see the concern coming up there for Gertrude, because I think that despite everything, she does love her son. Her feelings towards Claudius, I think, again, vary depending on the production. And this is one of the things that I really love about this play, is how much it can change depending on the actors in the production. I think that she does care about Claudius. I think a certain amount of that marriage probably had to do with just fear and grief and wanting comfort, because her husband is dead. Her son wasn't there when her husband died, and as a woman in this time era, she would have been left very, very unstable in her position. So there's probably a bunch of things going on with that marriage. Also, Claudius, we can see, is very manipulative, and he seems to have a fair amount of control over Gertrude. Not complete, and it lessens as the play goes on, I would say, but he definitely has a lot of influence over her to an unhealthy extent. And I think she has a lot of internalized self-hatred as well as a result of this, because she's in denial about it, but I think she does feel guilt over moving on so fast and over the fractured relationship with her son, which admittedly is not totally her fault. It is partly her fault because, you know, refusing to let him grieve and all this stuff, but you do see her reaching out to her son and showing concern throughout the play. So yeah, mixed feelings there. She's a complicated character, I would say. The relationship between Hamlet and Ophelia, speaking of women in this play, is another situation where I don't know how I feel about this, because again, it depends on which production I'm looking at. In something like the Benedict Cumberbatch production, which again, I'm going off of memory, it's been a couple of years since I've seen it, but you know, there seems to be much more of what I would call a healthy relationship, or a formerly healthy relationship. It's not healthy during the play, but you get the impression there probably was a healthy relationship at some point. But then in something like this, it seems like there could have been, but it's a lot more ambiguous. And also, it's a lot more tense between them throughout the rest of the play in this one than the Benedict Cumberbatch version. Yeah, I think I'm just going to leave this one here because I could ramble about this play for hours, but I don't think that's a good idea when it comes to these kind of videos. If you guys have any comments, feel free to put them down below. I'm always happy to talk to you guys about this. I absolutely adore this play, but honestly, regarding anything, feel free to talk to me about it. I've loved doing this series with you guys, so thank you so much, and have a fabulous day. See you later.